relatively low levels of debt. Now, there's more fundamental details behind that, but that's what you really are looking for. And the cool thing about those companies, again, in really bad economic times, is they simply do not go bankrupt. And that's awesome if you are trying to save yourself in an economic disaster. And the weird thing about quality is you would expect for that benefit, for the fact that these companies are not going to go bust, they're going to outperform in any really bad crisis, you'd underperform the rest of the time. So you'd pay for that, and you don't. So we really do like high quality as if you're going to have a single long-term bias in your portfolio, it should be towards quality. Now, today, if I was going to have any bias in my portfolio, it would be towards deep value because they're really cheap. They're not particularly low quality. They're not the highest quality companies out there, but they are the cheap thing. But if you're going to have a long-term bias in your portfolio, you might as well bias yourself towards high quality because they do fine the rest of the time and they really save your bacon in a disaster.
Hey, finally, Ben, one thing about this banking episode has been that it clearly transcends borders. I mean, how many names are available in that universe, do you think, in Europe versus U.S.?
Yeah, so if you look, like the deep value stocks in the U.S. are trading in kind of the cheapest 10% of their history versus the market. In Europe, they're trading in the cheapest 6% of history. So if anything, they're even cheaper. And frankly, in Europe, stocks are generally cheaper. So we think actually being in deep value, you want to be in deep value anywhere you are around the world. And there's plenty of stuff to buy in Europe. But for us, one of the exciting things is the deep value stocks in the U.S. are cheap enough that they are a group of U.S. stocks we've been excited about buying, and it's the first time in a few years that we've been able to find a group of U.S. stocks we were really excited about. So we like them everywhere. Absolutely, there's stuff worth owning in Europe, but there is stuff worth owning in the U.S. as well.
It's certainly a playbook, and viewers are looking for all kinds of different playbooks right now, Ben, that's for sure. Appreciate it very much. Good to see you again. Ben Inker.
Thank you very much.
Well, regional bank stocks popping this morning on reports that federal officials are considering expanding the programs that provide liquidity to financial institutions. First Republic is up big, as is First Citizens, after taking over most of Silicon Valley Bank. That optimism in regionals buoyed by exclusive reporting by CNBC over the weekend. It shows the deposit drain from smaller banks into bigger banks is actually slowing right now. So CNBC.com's Hugh Son, who wrote this story, joins us now. Hugh, great reporting. Break it down for me, especially given the fact that we did get that high-frequency Fed data on Friday as well that showed, at least earlier in the month, that there was a rotation from the smallest banks in terms of deposits into the biggest banks.
Hey, Morgan, great to be with you. Yeah, clearly the data out on Friday, which, by the way, is a delayed snapshot. Essentially, it's the deposit flows up till March 15th or so. And my reporting exclusively over the weekend shows that, at least when it comes to the regional banks that were losing deposits to the likes of Wells Fargo, the likes of JP Morgan and Citigroup, that bleeding has stopped for the time being, at least. So my sources, these firms have basically just said, sometime in the middle of the month, I want to say March 16th or so. And that was around the time that, if you recall, 11 of the biggest banks got together to inject $30 billion into First Republic. That really created, a different sort of feel from the acute phase of this regional banking crisis earlier in the month. And a lot of movements of funds have really kind of slowed and stopped in recent days, which I think is good news for the market overall.
Yeah, it's we've talked about it, right? This crisis of confidence that has played out in the banking sector in recent weeks. So this idea that there's a stabilization sounds incredibly promising. We've also been talking a lot about commercial real estate, and I wonder what your sourcing and your reporting is uncovering around that and around the concerns that could at some point, maybe not right away, but at some point be the next shoe to drop.
So it's good to point out the acute phase. The deposit flight seems to have staunched, and that's calmed down. And what's left us really is with an awakened awareness